Welcome back to our teaching series. My name is Brian Creary. I'm the director of Sanctuary House of Prayer here in Winnipeg. And I'm doing a teaching series on who is this we're following, really coming out of what's going on with our pandemic and the experiences that we're having in the nations. It's just raised all kinds of questions in the hearts of believers because it's unsettling and it's disruptive and it's broken us from our routines of attending meetings and functioning in a certain way, and it's really just caused us to discover whether or not we trust the heart of Jesus. Do we know Him? Are we able to follow Him and hear His voice? And so, the best way to increase that is to set ourselves before Him and to learn more about what He's like. So that's what this series is about. So far, we've looked at Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 17, done a few episodes on that, which you can find on our YouTube channel or on Facebook. They're there. And I'm going to continue on with it today. We're going to do one more, Colossians chapter 1, and then we're going to move on to a different passage in our next one. So last time when we talked, we were wading through some pretty deep theological issues. The waters were deep. It's not unbiblical stuff. It's just unfamiliar to most people as they make their way through normal life. And these ideas are not often thought about, but they can have a powerful impact on our hearts when we actually let them sink down into us, which is the reason for this teaching series. 10 or 15 minutes of me talking is one thing, but I really encourage you to take the time to look into the passages, take them on your own time, stare at them and say, Jesus, would you talk to me about what it means that you are the firstborn over all creation? And let him talk to you about these things, that you created everything, that you sustain everything. Those are powerful things that can really change the way you feel about your life and your journey in Him. We saw that Jesus, the man from Nazareth, was the one who actually created everything and holds it all together by His will, and even now does that. Jesus is the man who grew up as a child in front of all of them and us too through the scriptures, and is actually the head of the church, the very church that we're part of, that we're all part of globally, and the one who will give fulfillment to all of it in the end. It is clear, and I think if we are honest, that as you look around, you realize we're living as believers in the fog of what the Bible would call the darkened understanding, where we can't quite see clearly, and our minds try to understand, but it's just a struggle. We have darkened understanding. We have the inability to see clearly things as they really are. And we are too often, again, I think if we want to be honest, far more interested in lesser things, sports and entertainment, or our financial well-being, or getting some holiday time when this pandemic is over with, and going to the lake for the summer, or just enjoying our lives. And it's okay. It's all okay. The earthly pleasures are okay, but there is something, or should I say someone, far higher and far greater, and to have eyes to see and to really be impacted. So we're going to move on in our passage. We're going to look at the last section of Colossians 1. I'm just going to warn you, we're about to be confronted with an idea here that is so powerful and so disruptive to our Western existence that if you're standing, you better sit down. Pull over if you're driving. No, not really, but get ready, because this is a disruptive concept. Let me read this to you. It's from chapter 1, verses 18 to 20. In the NIV, it says, "And He, Jesus, is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything He might have the supremacy." Some translations call it the preeminence. "For God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether things on earth or in things in heaven, by making peace through His blood shed on the cross." Verses 18 to 20. Now, for those of us who grew up in a Western nation, grew up in a democracy, the following idea is easy enough to understand, what I've just described, but this is very difficult to accept. Jesus is seen in this passage as the head of the body, the church, and the firstborn from among the dead, but for a specific reason. It says, so that in everything He might have the supremacy, or the preeminence. Now, when we say supremacy, we kind of bristle at that term in the West, because in our culture, we have been raised in a system where the people have a good measure of power over their leaders. And if we don't like the current prime minister in our country, we can vote him out and we can get a new one. Don't push us or we'll rise up and we'll throw you out, in a nice way. We're Canadians. But we might not use that language, although some people would. But the thinking is firmly embedded in our Western democratic worldview. We don't follow anyone in our culture. It doesn't exist where we consider them supreme or having the supremacy. It's a false, unknown concept to us in the West. And of course, this is the blessing of our system, the democratic system, which we all enjoy the blessing and are happy to have it. We don't have to be subjected to the tyranny of a bad leader for very long. Even if you get a bad prime minister, you do know that you can vote him out at the end. You have some power. And there's always a way, I'll use this phrase, there's always a way back to having the nation blessed again. And the will of the people chooses. And so, there are limitations to the system, but there's always a way back to blessing because we are never subjected to the rulership or the authority of someone that is not a good leader. However, in this passage, it is clear that there is one who ultimately will be seen and known and understood as the king over all creation. Jesus is supreme and will be known as supreme, and he will be revered and obeyed as such. He'll be known and understood, and he will exercise his supremacy over the earth. Philippians chapter 2, verses 9 to 11, fairly well-known passage, but let me just highlight this section. It says, "Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at that name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father." Every tongue, every knee, everywhere. This means every human, every angel, every demon, everybody in hell, everybody's going to bow their knee. Everybody's going to confess Jesus Christ is the Lord. He is the Lord. Everyone. Supremacy means that you are superior to all others in authority and power and status. There's no getting around it. Jesus is declaring, the Bible is declaring, and it will be seen and understood to be true in our earth, on this planet, in the midst of our people in a day, in a future day. It'll be clear to everyone that he has the supremacy and deserves the corresponding honor that is due to a king such as him. We might have a prime minister that's well liked, or a president that is respected and followed. It seems harder these days to find world leaders like that because the planet tends to be well divided. But the reality is that those dynamics are real in humans, but all the more so with Jesus. He really will be supreme and he really will be respected as such. It also means that there's no argument in your mind or my mind or heart that justifies us not submitting entirely and happily to his will for your life. When the king says it is to be done, there's no argument. And again, that's jarring because we don't operate like that in our Western culture. We're not dealing with a flawed monarch here, though, whose days are numbered anyway. Jesus is going to be the king now, and he's going to be the king forever, without end. He's firmly in place. He is supreme. He is creating and sustaining, and he's ruling, and that's just who he is. And it's ours to discover and to come to terms with. The response of our hearts and the actions that follow should be, now and forever, a huge yes in your heart. That on the inside, in your own heart, in your own will, as you discover this, an increasing sense of yes to the supremacy and the rulership of Jesus grows in your heart. And when we don't agree, it's us that needs to change our view. The problem is ultimately on our end. Now, having said that, the rest of the passage does bring some comfort to us. The king is going to have his supremacy, his preeminence, yes, that's Jesus. But it will be because he acted to reconcile all things to himself through the most selfless and giving action of his own death on the cross. That Jesus became one of us and came to the earth and took on human form and then sacrificed his life, willingly laying it down in a selfless, serving action that it would have ramifications for all time. And that is the leader, that is the one, that is the king who has supremacy. In other words, the king with the supreme authority over your life has already shown you that he's the kindest one you will ever meet, and he has given you more than you will ever understand. There's no need to fear the king. On the contrary, if we could only see him rightly, we would drop all of our petty human demands and we would run into the arms of the one who loves you more than any other. If you could really see him right, we wouldn't stick our chest out and say, I've got an opinion too, because I know and you maybe don't, and I have the right to make my demands. We cling so tightly to our rights as though they protect us somehow from the demands of others, or somehow give us a sense of identity in this changing world. Like if I have a strong view, therefore I know who I am and you need to respect me. But the truth is that your identity is only really found in Jesus anyway, ultimately, and there is nothing to fear or to be protected from this King of Heaven, who declares that he has great love and acceptance over you if you will only turn your heart and embrace him. Every now and then, I'll hear a Christian say concerning some natural disaster or untimely death of an innocent victim in some senseless, violent act, that's not fair. And I know what they mean. And Jesus does too, by the way. There's a lot of crazy stuff that takes place. And bad behavior of one human against another, it isn't fair. It seems terrible. And there's stuff in the news on that all the time. But when a tsunami hits or an earthquake or something goes on, or you lose your job, or somebody steals your lawnmower, or whatever it is, and we feel as though it's unfair, as though somehow God has treated us incorrectly. He's not been fair with us, and we have rights and demands, and we need to exercise those. And Jesus understands what you mean, but it is rooted in wrong thinking. Nothing is unfair if you are a believer standing before the king that is governing entirely in righteousness. Yes, the world is full of troubles, but Jesus is the supreme one and is described, Joel chapter 2, as gracious and compassionate and slow to anger and abounding in love. And he even relents from sending calamity when we ask him. No one is like him, and no one rules more rightly than he does. And no one could be trusted more than Jesus, the firstborn of all creation. Next time when we get together, we're going to see Jesus in action. We're going to see him being baptized by John the Baptist, and shocked when we see the response from heaven, and he'll shock everybody around him with everything that follows after that, including you and me. And when you see him there, you will see him differently, hopefully forever. And you'll see him just a little bit more rightly. And that means everything. So let me pray, because we need our eyes open. So Jesus, we just thank you that you love us. You are the kindest one. And we thank you that it is true that you are supreme and you have greatest of authority. You are a righteous leader. And so we say yes to it. We don't back up from it. We declare it to be true. We ask you for eyes to see you rightly. We ask you for the yes in our spirit to grow. We ask you, Lord, that you would be kind to us and that you would bring us along into the depth of relationship with you that we only dream about. Jesus, we say we love you. Show us more. In your name we ask. Amen. Bless you guys. See you next time.